Stan Tinsley speaking. Today, the 30th of July, 1990, I'm interviewing Mr. Aston Kennedy at 1160 Kennesaw Avenue in Knoxville, Tennessee. Mr. Kennedy is going to give us the history and tell us some of the interesting things on the Tennessee State Guard that was organized in 1941. If you will, Mr. Kennedy, just take it from there.
Well, the Guard was authorized by an act of the legislature shortly after the National Guard was called into federal service back in either late 1940 or early 1941.
Just be sure now. Okay.
That is
okay.
copy of that.
Okay, go ahead. That thing's doing all right today.
You've got it on over
yeah,
there
it's
now.
On now. You stop
Walker
there.
Leach, who was a highly decorated veteran of World War I, insurance executive here in Knoxville, was commissioned captain of Company A, designated in the 3rd Regiment, I believe it was, of the Tennessee State Guard. And he personally enlisted most of the initial members of the company, and he restricted his recruits to those who had either had previous military experience or had had ROTC training. In my own case, I had ROTC for 3 years at Knoxville High School and 2 years at UT, but it had no military experience other than that. Now, Dan, I can ramble on here and probably repeat myself over and over again, and not knowing exactly what you have in mind. What I would suggest, if possible, that you ask questions and let me attempt to answer them, and if possible, if I don't answer them satisfactory, you let me know and I'll elaborate.
Okay, if you would name some of the names of the fellows that were in the first meeting or regimentation of the Tennessee Guard, what they did then and what they did later in civilian life. To try to get a background on this thing, I think we can work from this picture right here and sort of take some histories as you know them as we go along.
The picture that you referred to was made following a November 11th parade. November 11th, you recall, was Armistice Day. Now they refer to it, I guess, as Veterans Day or some other thing, and it was the custom to have military parades of whatever units could be rounded up on November 11th. And we, together with the ROTC from the university and whatever other military units were available, had marched in the parade. And following the parade, we went down to the John Lee Playground, which was along Central Avenue under the Church Street Viaduct at that time, and had a company picture made. The first and only one that I know of made of the original company. And the matter we were discussing there a minute ago about the movers and shakers, the people who had either then or later were important positions in the business community here in Knoxville. It is quite quite unusual, I think, that this number would be enlisted into one company. Along the back row, and the first sergeant of the first company, and again a veteran of World War I, was George W. Reagan, the owner of a contracting company by the same name. Quite prominent man in the community. Next to him was Ralston Matheny, also a well-known Knoxvillian who operated O'Neill's Restaurant for a number of years and had a bookstore for a number of years. He was the husband of Cecil Holloway, and had their home was on Kingston Pike near the entrance to Sequoia Hills. Fred Price is the next man to there. He was a vice president and collection attorney for the Tennessee Valley Bank. And next to him, I am pictured. And at that time, I was a vice president of the Tennessee Valley Bank. And next to me was Everett Biggs, insurance agent. Next man is a man by the name of Bishop, whose first name I do not recall. Then Bob Brule, who was an employee, senior engineering employee with the KUB. James Dempster, who at that time was an employee of his uncle, George W. Dempster, at Dempster Machine Shop, but later was president and CEO of the Dempster operations, and who made the Dempster dumpsters and other items of that kind. Russell Briscoe, a well-known insurance man with J.E. Lutz and Company, and Bob Scott, another insurance man. Next to him is a man by the name of Wright, whose initials I don't recall. Charlie Wallace of Wallace & Wallace Real Estate Company. And Hank Moriarty, who was for many, many years a well-known salesman for Halls on the Square. It was originally, and at the time he was enlisted in the company, it was Halls on Gay Street. Later became Hall Brown, and now is out of business. And the next person I remember there is Ed Fowler. Frankly, I'm not sure what Ed, I think he was in the insurance business also. He was son of General Fowler and brother of Frank Fowler, who was also in the company over here, who was a well-known attorney. But Ed, I'm not quite sure what business he was at the time. And there's James Hall II of Hall's store on Gay Street, as I just referred to. A man by the name of Ralph Craig, who was an Army veteran. And the next row, Jim Stewart, who's a well-known real estate man in town. Bob Culver, who at that time was a vice president of Fidelity Bankers Trust Company, later became president of Tennessee Valley Bank. Phil Jones of Phil Jones Oil Company. Don Severance, a CPA. Alan McKeon, who was a salesman for a wholesale grocer. Then James Hall Jr., or Little Jimmy as he was known, first cousin to the other James Hall, also one of the principals of Hall's clothing store on Gay Street. Charles McNabb, who was an attorney but also was the principal operator of Fowler's Furniture, wasn't he, for a number of years?
Right.
Which was a family business that he was involved in. Ed Chavan, who was with Chavan Lumber Company, later, 2 years after this, was mayor of Knoxville. Spent his lifetime primarily in the lumber business. Leonard Ambrose, a practicing attorney at that time, and recently retired, firm of Ambrose and Wilson attorneys. Young man by the name of Ross Perrin, who I believe worked for KUB, went into service very early and was killed very early in active duty. Next man is Ed Newell, who at that time was a senior officer at the Fidelity Bankers Trust Company. Later became vice president of the Hamilton National Bank in Knoxville. Still later was president of the First National Bank of Sullivan County. Then next man I recognize is Sam Spillman, who was primarily in real estate and property management of family estate. I don't know what else beside that. Maynard Furman is the second man beyond Sam, who was in the personnel department out at Oak Ridge, one of the principal contractors there. I don't know right now whether it was Stone Webster or one of the operating company, Westinghouse, or one, but one of our occupations, while we had a few minutes left over, was sitting around trying to figure out what was going on out at Oak Ridge. He was employing all these people with degrees by the dozens following their names, and we would see that they came from this company or this university, and we try to make heads and tails of it, see what in the world was going to be built at this facility at Oak Ridge. And then next man in Maynard, I don't remember. A couple others in the front row I can't name right now, but I believe we're down here where, is that Frank Preston there? I believe you
Right here.
Was.
Yeah, this is
the second man in that front row, Frank Preston, who was in the oil business with Phil Jones for a number of years, quite well known in the community. Ed Elliott, who owned a coal company over in South Knoxville. Frank Creekmore, who together with his brother Bob were well-known attorneys here in Knoxville. Then Bob Case, who was employed by TVA. Roy Witt, who at that time, I don't remember, I believe he was in the life insurance business. I think he was selling life. I know he sold life insurance later, but he went on into service after he'd been in the company just for a short time and was commissioned a captain in, became a captain in the Marine Corps, I'm pretty sure. I don't know the next man, but George Tate, who was in building materials, is the next one. Aubrey Jenkins is an attorney, still practicing, I think, on a semi-retired basis here in Knoxville. Bill Vance was in the furniture business in Knoxville. John G. King is the next man there, was agent for the Aetna, not an agent, but he had a executive position of some kind with Aetna Insurance Company, and shared offices with up in J.E. Lutz. He didn't work directly for J.E. Lutz, but he worked with Aetna out of J.E. Lutz's office. Ernest Newton is the next man, who at that time was probably vice president of the Park National Bank. He later became president of the Park National Bank. George Taylor was a practicing attorney. John Pettyjohn, I can't remember what his business was, but he was a well-known businessman here in town. Frank Fowler was a prominent attorney of the firm of Fowler and Fowler. Bob Shriver was a Shriver Brothers Shriver Brothers clothing store. Later went into real estate business. The officers across the front were James B. Wright, who was second lieutenant, who was one of the principals and manager of Davis Manufacturing Company, who manufactured food additives, extracts, vanilla flavoring, and things like that. Walker Leach, who I mentioned already, was the captain of the company. Cameron Brackney was an insurance agent and was first lieutenant of the company. Now that is, to the best of my recollection, the men who were initially enlisted into Company A back, the company was organized on I'm pretty sure May 20th, 1941. And this picture we're looking at and talking about was made there on Armistice Day, 1941.
What to what would you say in age?
The youngest man in there probably was not below 30. And at the time I was around 35, and most of them were a few years younger or older. Some few were in their 50s, and there may have been one or two in their upper 20s, but if I'm going to guess, the average age would have been around 35, 36.
What percentage of this group would you say went on, sooner or later went into active service?
That initial group, probably about a fourth of them. Now, as vacancies occurred due to resignation or going into service, or for whatever reason, why other men were enlisted in the company and subsequently went on into federal service. I have heard it estimated and discussed it with others that were in the Guard during the time I was, that probably as many as 300 may have gone through the company. I don't know, but I do know there were over 100. Back in 1944, a radio personality here in town was planning to do a program on the radio about the Guard and asked me to provide him some information, and I made up a list which I labeled at that time a partial list of members who had gone into service, and there were 95 on that list that I compiled from just my own memory.
About, do you remember how many total were in that picture there, approximately?
No, I don't know that I ever counted them, but there were, you can count them there pretty quickly.
Just, if you will, tell me how many were in this group.
Approximately 60.
Okay. Tell me a little more about the actual purpose of the Tennessee State Guard.
The purpose, I assume, frankly, it's been a long time since I read that enabling act, but I assume we were to perform whatever duties were assigned to us by the Adjutant General of the state and, of course, under instructions from the governor, but mostly to maintain order in the event of any civil commotion or problem that the local police force could not undertake to handle, and basically do whatever duties that normally would be performed by the National Guard if their National Guard had been here. Since the National Guard was in service, the State Guard, for all practical purposes, took the place. We didn't have much need. We were never officially called out. That is, my unit never was. We voluntarily performed services in case of several floods here locally, and we came within about 24 hours of being officially mobilized to see duty over at the racial problem that occurred in Columbia, Tennessee. They wanted a guard unit from another section of the state. They did not want to use a local unit, even a national unit, because it was too close home, and the people that were involved in it were the local people. And Ed Newell, who was at that time major of the local units here, had 3 companies in his battalion, and I, who at that time was captain of Company 8, went over to Columbia and made a survey of the situation, and were to have gone back to perform riot control duties in a couple of days, but fortunately the local authorities got things under control, tempers quieted down, it wasn't necessary. Well, we'll turn that thing on. It's quite kind of interesting, I guess.
Yeah.
Their initial armament was 30 caliber model 1917 Enfield, and after a period of time, I don't recall what date it was, the situation got so tight that the federal government recalled these Enfields and used them for federal service somewhere. And we at that time were issued 12-gauge shotguns. But before those shotguns came, we didn't have any arms at all. And just so the men would have something to drill with, and our drills were primarily in riot control formation, either in V's or angles, to the right and to the left, to clear crowds from wherever they might be assembled and improperly and shouldn't need to be cleared. Particular regard if they were around any war production facility in such a way that they were interfering with production of war. But I was able to arrange with either an Eagles or a Masonic lodge of some kind. A friend of mine knew that they had formerly had a drill team, and they had up in their storeroom about 30 or 40 old single barrel Springfield, single shot Springfield 45-70 caliber military pieces that were were used during the years from the late 1860s until the mid 1890s, at which they were replaced by the Krag repeating rifle that were issued to the service army at that time. But we borrowed those things, and they each had bayonets, and so as far as riot control is concerned, we still wouldn't be wanting to shoot anybody anyhow, but if you had to move a crowd out, there's nothing any better than a bayonet on the end of a rifle to move a crowd back. And particularly these old long 45-70s with about an 18-inch bayonet on the end of them. So we had those for quite a while. And after some time, we received a shipment of 12-gauge shotgun and double-aught buck ammunition, and also quite a assortment of different bird shots and game shots. And of course, we never used those for anything. Couldn't drill with them, and we just had them stored away in the event of some emergency where we would have been required to have used. But after later we got a reissue of regular Springfield 03 model, and our company had 3 45 caliber submachine guns, and we had the officers were finally issued some sidearms. They were 45 caliber revolvers, Navy model. Where they'd been in storage in the intervening years, I don't know, because I don't think the Navy used that kind of but they were brand new, they'd never been used. And
who was
prior to that time, you know, any officer carried any sidearms as personal.
Who was furnishing this? The state furnishing this to you, or the Army, or the federal government?
The federal government furnished the state furnished it to us.
I see. That's the way it was.
And the Adjutant General of the state was the man that was the liaison between the federal authorities. We were basically under the supervision of the military police division of the armed services. In the summer, we had encampments, which usually ran 2 weeks at Camp Forest, and also at Fort Benning. That was just for officers down at Fort Benning, and those sessions were all conducted by, or mostly conducted by, the military police.
When did you tell me this organization was disbanded? What year? I mean, was it taken out of service?
Well, I'm sorry, I didn't understand that.
When was the Guard disbanded? After the war, in 45 or 46?
I resigned in 45. the Guard kind of dwindled on the vine after that. You won't know exactly whether it was ever officially disbanded. I don't know.
I see.
Because I got out of it for personal reasons. The authorities I had over in Nashville were having to do business with, and I couldn't get along. And since it was all volunteer work, I saw fit to go ahead and resign after being in it for 5 years. And but just I'm sure no more than 10, 12 months later on, there was no effort. Actually, probably, if there was an official date, it would have been the date that National Guard units were released from national service, federal service.
Yeah, I see. Okay.
Now, I have just found out here a year or so ago that the State Guard Act has been reestablished, I assume would be a good word, and that there is a skeleton organization that exists here right now. There's the general for East Tennessee is Fred Sherrod here in Knoxville, and he has a skeleton crew that can be called at any time, and all they need to do would be to get the cannon fodder, so to speak, somebody to enlist in the company. All the officers are already established and in place.
I see.
And I think that's statewide.
Oh, be darned. So it actually exists in some form today, doesn't it?
It exists.
Well, be darned, that's interesting. Go ahead.
I'm trying to remember who all, practically every organization in town was involved in this promotion of sale of war bonds, how many could be sold in that particular weekend. And the Guard was involved in the delivery of the bonds. And the people, all the radio stations were ballyhooing the program. And just like these talk-a-thon things they have on now 24-hour program, you call in and you would take a $25 bond or a $50 bond and it would be delivered to you. Well, I was involved in it on two ways. I was the company commander of a company, and we had as many men as would volunteer for duty to put on their uniforms and deliver the bonds to the houses and collect the money and return it. And there were also some of the older Boy Scouts were doing the same work, and other organizations that maybe I don't recall. But I was also involved in it from the bank standpoint, my position there at the bank. We had to have people stationed at the fire halls and schools to write these bonds. And all was fine until at maybe station Beaumont Fire Hall would run out of $25 bonds. Well, the people working around there didn't know any better than they'd send somebody over to Park City and get some more $25 bonds. Well, those things had each been individually assigned out to the banks that we were responsible for. And I thought that we would never get that thing untangled that night. we worked, in fact, we never did get it fully reconciled. But we finally just struck a balance and got the Treasury Department to go along with the overall total, and I don't remember precisely what was finally done, except there's a terrible mess. Herman Neese, who was cashier of the Hamilton National Bank, was in charge of the bank functions.
Mm-hmm.
We all worked through Herman, but I remember we got through. We called our organization Confusion Incorporated, and Herman claimed that I had to be chairman of the board and he would be president of it. But for years and years we referred to one another as president of Confusion Incorporated, and each knew exactly what the other was talking about at the time. We're trying to sort out the reconciliation of the sales of those bonds.
You remember who this John Malacote was? Was he the salesman with the Flight Surgical Supply Company for umpteen years?
I kind of think so, but I'm not sure about that. It's a
Well,
very familiar name to me.
He must have been up there for 40 years, I guess. Malacote. He's
Very
retired
familiar.
now.
I mean, it's,
I just noticed that. I'd known him a long time. He's about the right age for it.